What if I told you that every single day, something is being stolen from you, not your money, not your possessions, but something far more valuable, something you cannot hold in your hands, yet it shapes every decision you make, every emotion you feel, and every dream you either pursue or abandon. That something is your energy. Most people think of energy only in terms of physical strength, or the calories that fuel our bodies. But the deeper truth is that your life force, emotional, psychological, and spiritual vitalities, constantly under attack. You have felt it before, even if you didn't have words for it. That strange heaviness after a conversation that seemed harmless. The exhaustion that follows hours spent scrolling through social media, even though you barely moved. The drained emptiness that lingers after interactions with people who always seem to need more from you. These are not coincidences. They are signs that your energy has been siphoned away. Throughout history, humans have spoken of invisible forces. The soul, the spirit, the aura, the vital essence. We may not agree on the language, but every culture has known that something intangible animates us, and without it, we become hollow. What few realize is how easily this force can be fed upon by others, sometimes by individuals close to us, sometimes by systems designed to manipulate us, and sometimes by subtle psychological mechanisms that work beneath our awareness. Ask yourself, why do you feel more exhausted by certain people than others? Why do modern workplaces, with all their supposed efficiency, leave workers in a constant state of burnout? Why does the digital world, promising connection and entertainment, so often leave you feeling numb and restless instead? These are not random flaws of modern life. They are features of an invisible economy and exchange, where your energy is the currency, and the world is full of leeches, eager to drain it. This script is not about mysticism or superstition. It is about uncovering how attention, emotion, and life force are extracted and consumed by others. From toxic individuals to massive social systems, there are forces invested in ensuring you remain a source of energy for them, and unless you recognize this theft, you remain vulnerable, bleeding vitality drop by drop, until you no longer recognize why you feel so empty. What is being stolen from you is not just time, not just focus, but the very essence of who you are. The question is no longer whether this theft is real, it is. The only question is, how much longer will you allow them access? Long before psychology put human behavior under a microscope, civilizations across the world spoke of an invisible essence that sustained life. They gave it different names, but the meaning was always the same. There is a force within us, and when it flows freely, we thrive. When it is blocked or stolen, we suffer. In India, this force was called prana, the breath of life. Not merely oxygen, but the subtle current that animates mind and body. Ancient yogic texts warned that a life disconnected from prana led to confusion, weakness, and decay. In China, sages of Taoism spoke of qi, a current that flowed through invisible channels known as meridians. Health was not simply the absence of disease, it was harmony in the flow of qi. Polynesian cultures called it mana, a sacred power that could be accumulated, lost, or stolen by others. And in the West, from Plato to the early mystics, there was always talk of the soul force, something beyond flesh and bone, something that carried the very weight of being alive. These traditions may seem distant or poetic, but they reveal something timeless, the human intuition that energy is real, that it is transferable, and that it is vulnerable to depletion. For shamans, healers, and philosophers, illness was rarely seen as random. It was often described as the result of imbalance, blockage, or theft. Misfortune was not simply bad, luck, it was the consequence of forces feeding on vitality. This idea was embedded even in our myths. Consider the vampire, a creature that does not strike its victim with brute force, but slowly drains their essence, leaving them pale, weak, and dependent. What is a vampire? if not a metaphor for the people and systems that quietly feed on our energy without ever killing us outright. The legend survives across cultures because it reflects a deep truth. Human beings have always known that there are entities, whether individuals or entire structures, that survive by leeching life force from others. For ancient societies, protecting one's energy was not just a matter of wellness, but of survival. Rituals, prayers, meditation, and even talismans were designed to shield the individual from what we might today call energy theft. While modern science may dismiss these practices as superstition, the symbolic message remains powerful. Vitality is not guaranteed. It can be drained, it can be stolen, and unless one learns to guard it, life itself can wither long before death arrives. So the question emerges, were these ancient teachings primitive attempts to explain illness and suffering, or were they pointing toward a psychological reality that modern humans have simply renamed? When we speak today of stress, burnout, or toxic relationships, are we not echoing the same ancient fear that something unseen is feeding on us, and if we do not stop it, we will slowly fade? The ancients may have described them as demons, spirits, or vampires, but today, psychology gives us another language. We call them emotional vampires. These are not creatures of folklore, but ordinary people who walk among us colleagues, friends, even family members, who feed not on blood, but on our attention, emotions, and psychological stability. Their survival depends on draining the vitality of others, and they are often so skilled at doing so that we barely notice it happening until we feel hollowed out. Psychologists have long studied how certain individuals manipulate others to meet their own emotional needs. Narcissists, for example, survive on what experts call narcissistic supply, a constant stream of validation, attention, or even conflict that fuels their fragile sense of self. Without it, they collapse. This is why some people cannot stand peace. They thrive only in the chaos they create, because chaos is the arena where they can drain the most energy. Then there is the phenomenon of emotional contagion, the ability of emotions to spread like viruses. Studies show that human beings unconsciously mirror the moods of those around them. Anger sparks anger, sadness invites sadness, anxiety multiplies in groups. This is where the concept of the toxic friend becomes clear. Spend enough time around someone who constantly complains, and you will feel drained, not because their problems are yours, but because your brain has absorbed their emotional state as if it were your own. Your nervous system has done the work of carrying their burden, and in doing so, has handed over your energy. Mirror neurons, discovered in neuroscience, reveal why this happens. These specialized brain cells fire not only when we act, but when we observe someone else acting or feeling. When we see someone in pain, the same regions in our own brain light up. It is empathy at the biological level, but it also means that certain people can exploit this system. The boss who keeps employees in a state of fear knows, consciously or not, that fear makes them compliant. The partner who constantly hints at abandonment knows that guilt keeps the other bound. The parent who thrives on endless sacrifice understands that exhaustion equals control. None of this requires fangs or supernatural powers. It requires only the human capacity to manipulate and the human vulnerability to absorb. What makes this more complex is that not all energy vampires are malicious. Some are deeply wounded people who have never learned how to generate their own emotional stability, so they borrow, steal, or drain it from others. They may not even realize what they are doing. The constant victim who always demands your attention is not necessarily evil, but their survival depends on making you their battery. To cut them off feels cruel. Yet to allow them access is to risk your own depletion. This moral tension is what makes energy vampires so dangerous. They do not always wear the mask of the villain. Sometimes, they wear the face of someone you love. Evolutionary psychology helps us understand why this pattern exists. Human beings are social creatures, wired to depend on one another for survival. Thousands of years ago, isolation meant death. To keep harmony in the tribe, we became hypersensitive to the needs and moods of others. Guilt, fear, and empathy evolved, not simply as emotions, but as survival mechanisms. They kept us connected. But what once ensured survival can now be weaponized in modern society. Those who learn to exploit guilt, to amplify fear, to manipulate empathy, are those who can drain the most energy without ever lifting a weapon. Real-life examples make this painfully clear. Think of the friend who turns every conversation into a story of how the world has wronged them. No matter how much support you give, it is never enough. You leave the conversation feeling emptied, while they leave temporarily relieved until the cycle repeats. Think of the coworker who thrives on gossip, pulling others into their web of drama, feeding off the collective anxiety they create. Think of the partner who oscillates between affection and cold withdrawal, forcing you into a constant state of vigilance, wondering what you did wrong. Each of these people has found a way to plug into your energy field, consciously or unconsciously, and to treat your vitality as their resource. This is the psychological face of the vampire myth. The draining does not happen with a bite, but with a sigh, a complaint, a demand, or a manipulative silence. It is not the blood they want, it is your attention, your emotional labor, your life force, disguised as care. And because we are wired for empathy, because we are wired to mirror, we comply. We bleed willingly, mistaking it for compassion. But the truth is sobering. Compassion without boundaries becomes self-destruction. Energy vampires thrive on those who cannot say no. Those who feel obligated to always give. Those who confuse sacrifice with love. And while these leeches may not intend to destroy, their survival depends on draining others, which means that unchecked, they will keep draining until there is nothing left. This is the bridge between ancient wisdom and modern psychology. The ancients warned of unseen forces that steal vitality. Today, psychology shows us how it happens in real time, through neural circuits, emotional contagion, and social dynamics. The leeches of energy are not creatures of the night. They are everyday people, everyday systems, everyday interactions that turn your natural empathy into their fuel. They are not always evil, but they are always hungry. And unless you recognize them for what they are, you will continue to give away what you cannot afford to lose. If individuals can drain us of energy, what happens when the very systems that govern our lives are designed to do the same? The truth is far darker than most are willing to admit. Beyond toxic people lies something even more insidious. Institutions, industries, and empires that operate like vast, parasitic organisms, feeding on the collective life force of entire populations. The media is one of the clearest examples. Outrage, fear, and scandal are not accidents of modern journalism. They are its fuel. News outlets discovered long ago that panic holds attention longer than peace. Fear spikes adrenaline, outrage floods the brain with cortisol, and both emotions are addictive. The longer you stay glued to the screen, the more energy is extracted, not in the form of blood or currency, but in the endless hours of attention that can be sold to advertisers. What looks like information is often an energy trap. What looks like choice is manipulation wrapped in entertainment. Social media takes this machinery further. These platforms are not neutral tools of connection. They are engineered systems of extraction. Every notification, every algorithmically curated feed, every infinite scroll is a carefully designed hook, pulling you into cycles of dopamine highs, followed by emotional lows. Like a casino slot machine, it thrives on the unpredictability of reward. The scroll is endless because your energy is endless, at least, until you stop feeding the system. What you call a harmless habit is, in truth, a constant leakage of vitality into a machine that survives by draining you. This is not accidental design. It is the deliberate architecture of psychological dependence. Behind the curtain are teams of behavioral scientists who know exactly how long it takes before you break, how many likes you need to feel validated, how much outrage you can endure before you collapse into numbness. The system is parasitic not because it kills you quickly, but because it thrives on keeping you alive just long enough to keep extracting. Politics, too, runs on energy extraction. Outrage and division are the currency of modern governance. Fear of the other, fear of collapse, fear of change. These are not flaws of political discourse. They are its engines. When George Orwell wrote 1984, he warned not only of surveillance, but of the endless manufacture of enemies to justify power. The spectacle of politics today mirrors the ancient Roman strategy of bread and circuses, distractions, for the masses, while power drains them unnoticed. Citizens are not merely voters. They are batteries, fueling the system with their emotional investment, their constant attention to the theater of conflict. Consider the legacy of Edward Bernays, the man often called the father of modern propaganda. A nephew of Sigmund Freud, Bernays applied psychoanalytic insights not to healing, but to manipulation. He understood that people are not driven by logic, but by unconscious desires and fears. With this knowledge, he helped corporations and governments mold public opinion, not by offering truth, but by manufacturing consent. Bernays once remarked that the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the masses is an invisible government that truly rules. His words reveal the mechanism of the parasite. It survives not by open force, but by quietly consuming the emotional energy of those who believe they are free. Corporate advertising follows the same model. Commercials do not sell products. They sell identities, fears, and insecurities. They drain energy by creating dissatisfaction, by whispering that who you are is never enough until you buy. The endless cycle of consumption is less about meeting needs and more about fueling the system's hunger for profit. Every image of perfection, every staged smile, every manufactured desire is a tendril of the parasite reaching into your psyche, extracting not just money but the energy of longing, comparison, and endless striving. And then there is the spectacle itself, the constant noise of celebrity scandals, political theater, and cultural outrage. These are not random distractions. They are carefully maintained rituals of energy diversion. While we argue over the latest headline, the machinery of extraction continues its work unnoticed. The parasite does not care whether you are on the left or the right, whether you cheer or boo. It feeds on the intensity of your attention, the heat of your emotion, the endless cycle of engagement. In this way, even resistance can become fuel if it is not conscious. The most chilling part of this machinery is its invisibility. No one forces you to scroll through feeds late at night. No one chains you to the news cycle. Yet the hooks sink deep, and before you realize it, hours of your life have been siphoned away. Energy that could have gone into creation, reflection, or connection is absorbed into the endless circuits of the system. Like a parasite, it does not thrive by killing you, but by keeping you alive just enough to keep feeding. When ancient societies spoke of vampires, demons, or spirits that drained vitality, perhaps they were pointing toward this truth, that human structures themselves can become predators. Systems can be designed not for the flourishing of life, but for its slow consumption. And like all parasites, the system survives best when you do not notice the bite. To see this machinery clearly is unsettling. It means admitting that much of what we consider normal life, our entertainment, our politics, our digital habits is not neutral. It is designed to keep us drained, distracted, and dependent. But recognizing this is the first step to reclaiming energy. The parasite thrives in darkness. Exposure weakens its grip. The question is whether we are willing to look at it, to name it, and to finally withdraw the fuel it needs to survive. Modern science has begun to uncover what ancient traditions always intuited. Human energy is not merely a poetic metaphor, but a biological and psychological reality. We often speak casually about being drained after an argument, or energized by an inspiring conversation. Yet neuroscience now confirms that these metaphors correspond to measurable processes in the brain and body. At the heart of this discovery lies one of the most precious currencies of the modern age. Psychologists describe attention as the gateway to consciousness itself, the filter that determines what enters our awareness and what fades into background noise. Every notification, advertisement, and distraction competes for this finite resource. The more fragmented our focus becomes, the more exhausted we feel. Because attention consumes energy in the most literal sense: glucose, oxygen, and neurological effort. In other words, what you pay attention to is not free, it costs you life force. Equally critical is stress, the silent thief of vitality. When the brain perceives a threat, whether from a real predator in the wild or a looming deadline at work, it releases cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone. Cortisol is useful in short bursts, sharpening our senses and fueling immediate survival, but in chronic doses, it corrodes us from the inside. It disrupts sleep, weakens the immune system, and accelerates cellular aging. The modern human, perpetually bombarded by headlines, financial pressures, and digital overstimulation, is locked in a near-constant stress response. Instead of fighting off predators, we fight off emails, political scandals, and an endless stream of unresolved anxieties. The energy drained by this invisible hormone is incalculable, yet its effects are written on our faces, our health, and our dwindling ability to concentrate beyond the individual. Science reveals something even more striking. Human beings resonate with one another emotionally, almost like tuning forks. Neuroscientists studying mirror neurons discovered that our brains are wired to simulate the feelings we observe in others. This is why a smile feels contagious, why a crowd's panic spreads like wildfire, and why sitting with a chronically negative person leaves us inexplicably tired. Emotional states leap from one nervous system to another, forming invisible webs of influence. What ancient shamans called sharing energy is now understood as neural mirroring, an emotional contagion. The science doesn't make the phenomenon less mysterious, it makes it more profound. Some researchers go even further. Institutions such as HeartMath have explored the electromagnetic fields generated by the human heart, fields measurable several feet away from the body. Their studies suggest that the heart is not only a pump, but also a transmitter of information, broadcasting emotional states into the environment. When people experience coherent states like gratitude or love, their heart rhythms become ordered, and their electromagnetic fields synchronize with others nearby. While these findings remain controversial in mainstream science, they echo a timeless intuition that human beings affect one another in subtle, invisible ways beyond words and actions. Energy, then, is not mystical vapor, it is measurable physiology. It is glucose fueling the prefrontal cortex as you wrestle with a problem. It is cortisol flooding your bloodstream when you argue with your boss. It is dopamine surging in your brain when your phone lights up with a new notification. It is the invisible synchronization of hearts and neurons when groups gather in shared emotion. Modern science reframes energy theft not as superstition, but as biology. When others hijack your attention, trigger your stress response, or manipulate your emotional resonance, they are literally depleting your body's resources. Yet there is a subtle paradox here. The same mechanisms that make us vulnerable to energy drain also make us capable of energy amplification. Just as fear spreads through crowds, so does courage. Just as anxiety contaminates a workplace, so does optimism. A single leader, teacher, or artist who embodies coherence can shift the entire emotional climate of those around them. Neuroscience reminds us that human beings are not isolated units of survival but nodes in a living network. Energy flows constantly between us, whether we notice it or not. This modern lens does not diminish the wisdom of the ancients. It enriches it. What they described as prana-ki, or mana, science now interprets as neurological fuel, hormonal balance, and electromagnetic resonance. The languages differ, but the essence is the same. Life is energetic exchange. When this exchange is balanced, we thrive. When it is corrupted, we wither. To understand the modern science of energy is not to strip it of mystery, but to recognize that the mystery lives in us, measurable in heartbeats, brainwaves, and the very chemistry of our survival. Ultimately, energy is not an abstract metaphor for motivation. It is the foundation of life itself. The question is no longer whether energy can be stolen, but how often it happens in our daily lives without our awareness. Every moment we are giving and receiving, resonating and absorbing, investing and losing. The invisible currents that shape our vitality are not confined to ancient temples or esoteric practices. They are here, now, measurable, in every beat of your heart, every flicker of your attention, every surge of cortisol in your veins. Modern science does not close the door on the enigma of energy, simply confirms that the enigma is real, and that it touches every single one of us. There are wounds that do not show on the skin, yet they leave us weaker than any visible scar. One of the clearest signs of energy drain is exhaustion without reason. You wake up after a full night's sleep, yet you carry a heaviness that coffee cannot dissolve. This fatigue does not come from your muscles or bones, it comes from your mind, from the invisible weight of interactions, thoughts, and unspoken obligations that press on you every day. Perhaps you have left a meeting or a family gathering feeling strangely depleted, even though nothing physically demanding occurred. You sat in a chair, exchanged words, and yet something was taken from you. The conversation replayed in your head afterward, looping endlessly, as if your energy had been stolen in fragments. One sigh, here. One argument, there, until you return home drained, unable to explain why. Overthinking after social encounters is another hidden symptom. Instead of feeling at peace, you replay what you said, wondering if you offended someone or if you should have responded differently. This cycle does not end with closure. It fuels more doubt, more guilt, more invisible leakage of energy. When your thoughts refuse to let go of a moment long after it has passed, chances are your vitality is being siphoned away. Mood swings are another subtle theft. Imagine scrolling through social media and suddenly feeling angry, envious, or empty, even though only moments earlier you felt fine. These emotions are not truly yours. They are echoes of what you consumed: a stranger's outrage, a celebrity's curated life. A headline designed to provoke these infiltrate your nervous system and color your mood. You carry them unknowingly, as if someone handed you a heavy bag to hold without asking your permission. The same pattern appears in families, friendships, and intimate relationships. Perhaps you notice a constant sense of guilt around a parent, a sibling, or a partner. You feel obligated to be available, to listen, to give, even when your own reserves are empty. Every call you answer, every demand you meet, leaves you lighter in spirit, but not in the liberating way lighter, because pieces of your energy have been chipped away. What should be love begins to resemble obligation, and obligation becomes a form of quiet control. Sometimes the sign is even more subtle: difficulty focusing. You sit down to work or study, but your attention slips through your fingers, not because you lack discipline, but because your energy has already been spent before you began. Arguments, distractions, the silent pressure of other people's expectations, all of these draw from the same reservoir. Focus requires energy, and when that energy is drained, concentration becomes almost impossible. These patterns are so common that most of us accept them as normal. We shrug off fatigue, chalk up mood swings to personality, excuse overthinking as simply being too sensitive. Yet behind each of these lies a deeper truth. We are not always tired because life is hard, but because invisible forces are siphoning our vitality. Sometimes those forces are people, sometimes they are systems, and sometimes, disturbingly, they are our own unhealed habits, our inability to say no, our addiction to validation, our fear of disappointing others, Recognizing energy drain requires brutal honesty. Ask yourself, why do I feel heavy after certain conversations? Why do I scroll for hours and end up emptier than when I began? Why do I feel anxious in some relationships, even when no words are exchanged? The answers to these questions are rarely comfortable, but they are essential. For every moment you ignore them, more energy leaks away unnoticed. The most unsettling realization is not that others drain us intentionally, but that we often participate unconsciously in our own depletion. We stay longer in conversations that weaken us. We engage in arguments we know will lead nowhere. We click on outrage we know is manufactured. We become complicit in our own exhaustion. Recognizing this is not an act of despair, but of awakening. It is the first step toward reclaiming the most precious currency you possess, your energy. The truth is simple, yet profound. What wears you down is not always visible. It lives in the shadows of interactions, in the weight of silence, in the pull of unseen obligations. By learning to notice these patterns, you begin to see the architecture of energy theft that has shaped your life for years. And once you see it, you can no longer unsee it. There comes a moment when recognition alone is no longer enough. To see the theft is only half the battle. The other half is choosing to no longer be complicit in it. Protecting your energy does not mean escaping the world, nor does it mean becoming hardened and cold. It means drawing clear lines between what feeds you and what depletes you, and then having the courage to cut off access to those who cross that line. The first weapon is perhaps the hardest: boundaries. For many, the word no carries the weight of guilt, rejection, or fear of abandonment. But no is not cruelty, it is architecture. Every no builds a wall, not around your heart, but around your life force. Boundaries are invisible shields that prevent others from walking into your mind as though it were a public square. The friend who constantly offloads their misery without change, the colleague who thrives on your compliance, the family member who uses guilt like a chain, all of them rely on your silence. Boundaries sever their access. In a society where endless availability is normalized, boundaries feel almost rebellious. Think of the simple act of not responding immediately to every message, every demand, every ping from your phone. It is not laziness. It is sovereignty. It is you declaring that your attention, the most precious form of energy you have, cannot be bought or stolen on demand. By limiting exposure to toxic individuals and digital distractions, you reclaim a piece of yourself that had long been on loan. But boundaries are not only external, they must be internal as well. Protecting your energy requires auditing your own habits, the late-night scrolling, the arguments replayed in your head, the constant need to justify yourself to others. Each of these is an internal leech, a self-sabotage disguised as normal life. To cut off access means cutting even the hooks you place in your own skin. This is where practices of grounding come in. Breathwork, meditation, and journaling may seem simple, but simplicity is their power. The breath is the first boundary. Every inhale centers you. Every exhale releases what does not belong. Meditation creates distance between you and the chaos of the world, showing you that not every thought deserves your energy. Journaling transforms invisible burdens into visible words, emptying the mind of weight it no longer needs to carry. These are not spiritual luxuries, they are acts of survival. In a culture designed to fragment your focus, philosophers have long recognized this principle. Epictetus, the Stoic, reminded his students that we cannot control the behavior of others, only the state of our own mind. His wisdom was not abstract, it was practical protection. To realize that another's anger does not belong to you, that their judgment is not your responsibility, is to cut the invisible cords through which energy drains. The battlefield is not out there in the world, it is in your perception. By guarding your perception, you guard your energy. Some may argue that protecting your energy is selfish, that by saying no, by withdrawing from toxic cycles, you are abandoning your duty to others. But this is the lie that keeps people enslaved to their own depletion. What good are you to others when you are drained, anxious, hollow? True service, true compassion, begins not in exhaustion, but in wholeness. Protecting your energy is not an act of selfishness, it is an act of preservation. Only from a place of strength can you truly give without being consumed. Consider history's greatest thinkers, creators, and leaders. They were not endlessly available to everyone. They were fiercely protective of their solitude, their focus, their inner world. From Nietzsche, walking alone in the Alps, to Marcus Aurelius, writing his meditations in the stillness of night. Each knew that the mind cannot thrive in constant exposure. Their wisdom and contributions were born not from constant interaction, but from selective engagement. They cut off access so that what mattered could flourish. The modern world resists this lesson. Social media thrives on your inability to withdraw. Corporations depend on your endless consumption. Toxic individuals rely on your silence. To cut off access is to disrupt a system that profits from your depletion. Every time you log off, every time you leave a draining conversation unfinished, every time you say no without guilt, you shift the balance. You begin to live not as prey, but as guardian of your own field. Protecting your energy field is not about building impenetrable walls. It is about choosing gates. It is about deciding who and what is worthy of entry. Some people, some ideas, some practices will feed you, strengthen you, expand your vitality. Others will strip you bare, leaving you fractured. The difference lies not in them, but in your willingness to discern and to choose. And so the question becomes, what will you allow in? Who will you grant access to the most precious force you possess? For in the end, your energy is your life. Everything you will ever do, create, love, or change depends on the strength of that current. To protect it is not only wise, it is the most profound declaration of freedom you can make. There comes a point when defending yourself from manipulation is not enough. To simply resist is to remain in reaction, always on guard, always battling the shadows that seek to consume your focus. Real transformation begins when you flip the current, when you turn your reclaimed energy not into defense, but into creation. The same force that was once drained by toxic relationships, endless distractions, or systems of control can become the very power that fuels art, innovation, and the building of a meaningful life. Every human being carries within them a reservoir of energy. For most, it leaks away invisibly, poured into arguments that go nowhere, cycles of fear, or the pursuit of things they never truly wanted. The tragedy is not simply in the loss, but in the opportunity cost what might have been created if that energy were preserved. When you begin to notice where your life force goes, and you learn to stop the bleeding, suddenly you hold in your hands something extraordinary. The raw material of freedom. History shows us that some of the most remarkable minds were fiercely protective of their energy. Nikola Tesla, for instance, lived in near isolation at times, not out of misanthropy, but out of necessity. He understood that his mental clarity was fragile, and that every unnecessary distraction chipped away at the brilliance he sought to harness. His inventions were not the product of luck, but of relentless focus, preserved and guarded like sacred fire. Without this protection, the visions that reshaped the modern world might have never materialized. Virginia Woolf, too, echoed this truth in a different context. Her call for a room of one's own was more than a plea for physical space. It was a recognition of the energetic sanctuary needed for creation. She understood that constant interruption, the weight of societal expectations, and the theft of mental time were all enemies of genuine expression. For Woolf, creativity required not only talent, but the fierce act of reclaiming one's own psychological territory. The revolutionary thinkers who altered the course of history, from Galileo to Martin Luther King Jr., did not merely fight against forces of suppression. They redirected their energy toward building new visions. Galileo's defiance of the Church's worldview was not a nihilistic rebellion. It was the opening of a greater cosmos. King's refusal to surrender to hatred was not passive resistance. It was the redirection of human will toward justice, dignity, and unity. Their power was not only in saying no to oppression, but in saying yes to a higher creation. On a personal level, this principle is no less true. Once you begin to withdraw energy from toxic loops, whether they are cycles of self-doubt, the manipulation of others, or the numbing grip of consumer culture, you create space. Into this space can flow creativity, learning, relationships that nourish rather than drain, and the courage to imagine possibilities beyond survival. Protecting your energy is not simply self-defense. It is the foundation of self-authorship. But here lies the paradox. Reclaiming energy is not about hoarding it. Energy unused becomes stagnant. The act of creation requires release. Just as a river gains life by moving, so too must human energy be directed outward. The difference is in choice whether the release is unconscious and exploited, or intentional and transformative. When you choose to direct your energy toward building rather than reacting, you step into a different order of existence. This is why art has always been revolutionary. To create a poem, a painting, a piece of music is to say, my energy belongs here, not in your system of control. To learn, to master a skill, to pursue knowledge is to declare, my mind is not your commodity. To cultivate love, friendship, and meaningful community is to embody the truth that human connection, freely chosen, is more powerful than manipulation. Each of these acts becomes a rebellion, not of destruction, but of creation. The invitation, then, is clear. Protect your energy as if it were gold, but spend it as if it were light. Guard it from those who would drain it, but do not fear to release it into the world. The measure of your life will not be how little was stolen from you, but how much you chose to create. Reclaiming your energy is reclaiming your destiny. When you are no longer bound by the invisible threads of manipulation, you begin to see what is possible. A life not defined by reaction, but by authorship. A future not dictated by fear, but shaped by imagination. This is the final truth. Your energy is your life. Protect it, and you preserve yourself. Direct it, and you transform the world.